Hello, and welcome to this episode of our Function Better series. Here, Jonce and Safiya discuss the joint-by-joint approach, which can be used to help guide your training, whether that be for helping you with pain or injury issues, or to improve function and performance in your chosen activities or sports.
So, Safiya, I remember you on a private group that we're on, Function Better private group. You said something about moving better. Do you remember? Do you recall that?
Yes, I remember, and I said that because I was getting older, I realized that it's not so easy to move the way I want to move without necessarily having pain afterwards or taking ages to recover. Or so that my aim was to really be able to keep my body in a good shape as long as possible and be able to do things that I want to do really without causing injury or even discomfort.
Right. And the reason I mention that is because I believe that we share the same interests, because I also want to be able to move better and feel good. And like you said, I think it's an age thing, you know, because I remember when I was younger, which wasn't that long ago, to be honest with you, right? Okay. I never really used to think about moving per se. Do you know what I mean? I go back doing my stuff. I'm in the gym, you know, I do my football, I do my martial arts. You know, even if I haven't been out doing anything for a while, I've been, say, like partying, right? And hadn't done anything, I would just get out and do a run. I'd go for 10 mile run, and that wouldn't be an issue. Do you know what I mean? You know, nowadays, taking time off of training, you know it when you step back, right? Okay. So the thing is, right, as I've said before, you know, I live in this great city and we have the great university, and we was talking about this movement stuff, and we talked about movement literacy, we talked about movement prerequisites. What I really want to talk about now is something called the joint-by-joint approach, which is linked to this idea of movement literacy. You know, it's like, where do we go from there? Right, okay. And this comes from someone called Mike Boyle, who's a strength and conditioning coach based in America. And he's great friends with Gray Cook, the physiotherapist. And you recall Gray Cook, right? Here's the link.
I do remember Gray Cook, especially the big book that you gave me, Athletic Body, I think, something.
Yeah, athletic body imbalance.
That's right. And it's an amazing book, quite technical, but it really opened my eyes. That was starting to open my eyes to this joints and mobility and.
Yeah. And in that book, it specifically highlights the FMS, the functional movement screen, which again you're familiar with because you've actually put you through that, right?
Yes, you did. I remember we had to do things that look simple, like doing just a lunge on one line, and that's when you realize, oh my God, I have absolutely no balance. Yeah. Or pushing yourself up from the floor into a press up position or plank position. I couldn't do it. So it was really obvious just doing this simple sort of little tests. There's something about, I can't remember, about, oh yeah, the arm or something. And it really showed like, wow, I am really limited in my movement.
I think you're talking about the rotary stability test where you have to sort of like lift an arm up and go back like you're doing a Superman, you call it. Right, okay, which is really testing your stability, and also the functional movement screen. I say test. The word is screen. It screens your stability and your mobility capacities. Looked at functional movement patterning, like lunging, as I think you've mentioned, squatting. You know, and the important thing to get from this is that it is a screen, and it's like having your blood pressure cuff taken, right?
Yeah, I guess when you get your blood test is blood pressure tested, is just to see whether is it high, is it normal, is it low. That's all you get. Yeah,
and if it's high, you then have to go off and get assessments to find out exactly what's going on, right?
Yeah, that would be the next stage, I suppose, where you really look for the actual root cause of the problem.
And the FMS, the functional movement screen, is the same thing. It just screens your overall movement. You know, how are you performing? What's going on with you? Right, okay. And if you find anything wrong with you, there is an algorithm within the functional movement screen process. If you do the certification of how to go around fixing this thing, you know, using corrective exercise, etc. Okay. There is, however, a red flag in it that if you show up with pain, then you really have to go off and get assessed. All right. But you know what? I'm digressing here. Cut back to this joint by joint approach thing. It comes about that Mike Boyle and Gray Cook were talking about the findings of functional movement screens. Okay. And Gray Cook revealed to Mike Boyle exactly how he thinks in his head about the body. And in his mind, the body is just a set of joints that is stacked upon each other. And it goes like this. If you look at the body on a joint by joint basis, starting from the bottom, starting from the foot, you find that the foot is designed for stability. The ankle complex is designed for mobility. Above that, the knee is stability. Then you go up to the hips, mobility. Up to the lower back, stability. Up above that to the thoracic spine, you've got mobility. The lower part of the neck and the middle part of the neck is stability, and the upper part is mobility. And then after you come back down to the shoulder region, you've got the scapular complex, which is stability, the shoulder, mobility, and so on, you know, elbow stability, wrist and that, mobility. So you can see how it alternates from stability to mobility.
That's
But
fascinating.
here is the fascinating thing, right? Here's the interesting thing, right? Okay, is that when you look at those joints and you look at how we are and our modern lifestyles, there are tendencies that develop within these joints. Now, that doesn't matter whether you are more sedentary or whether you're really active. These tendencies are the same for everyone. And here is the interesting part, like I said. The foot has a tendency for sloppiness. Okay, so it benefits a lot from stability training. The ankle has a tendency to be stiff, and so that benefits from mobility training. And as you go up the chain, you've got the knee becomes sloppy, it needs stability training, the hip stiffness, benefits from mobility training, and so it goes, you know. So what we find is the joints that we said were like stability, so like lower back would become sloppy, the thoracic spine, which is mobility, becomes like stiff. The joints that we could say that they're designed, their natural design, the ones that is designed for stability become sloppy, and the ones that designed for mobility, they become stiff.
Right. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean by sloppiness and stiffness and that sort of ambivalent? What is exactly what do you mean by sloppy?
Right. Okay.
For the foot, for instance.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about it. Let's start with stability, because a lot of us, when we think about stability, we think about core stability, and we think about like stiffness, right? Like not being able to move. But when I say stability, really, in my mind, I'm thinking more like movement control. Not stiffness, not staying still, because we are designed to move, all right? So we need to be able to control that movement. So the best way to look at stability is to think about it like movement control. Mobility, on the other hand, is having the freedom to move in all different directions. All right. So if you take the door that's behind me here now, okay, and we take the hinge that's on the door, okay, just the hinge on its own, you know, it's designed for mobility. It has to be able to open and close and do all those things without any outside influence. And that's another way to look at mobility. It needs to be something that is you can do actively without any outside, any passive influence. Okay, so the hinge has to be able to open and shut. Now, when you put it on the door frame and you hang a door on it, now by putting it on the door frame, that now gives it its stability so that it can control the door being able to open and shut. So mobility is being able to do what is you're designed to do, and stability is having movement control. Sloppiness now, when I say sloppiness, coming back to the foot now, I'm sure you're aware of, and you must have heard of people who might complain of having flat feet.
Yes, it's actually quite common. I'm discovering that more and more. You can see it having
Yeah.
this problem.
Okay. And so when we talk about flat feet, I'm using my hands here. It's something that we call, in the terminology, it's called like pronation, right? Okay. So we can say that there's two shapes to the feet. One is one of pronation, and one is of supination. So the foot flattening to the floor is pronation. So we call that sloppiness. If it's going down into this pronated manner and it gets stuck in there, for example, or there's no control on it, okay? And what's one of the remedies that we use for that is orthotics, right?
Yes, yes. Most of the time we're given things to put inside our shoes, aren't we?
Yeah. And what that's going to do is that's going to raise the arch of your foot, okay, which is taking it from that, flatness, and then bringing it back up to what we call supination, but giving it the arch, which gives it its stability. Okay, because most of what we're doing when we're walking, we need that foot to be in a stable position. You think about, I'm talking about the foot itself, not with the ankle here now. You think about when you land on your heel, that has to be solid. Okay, and then as the foot falls into the ground, that's where it pronates. We want that mobility. We want that to go down, but we want that to happen at control. But we also need to be able to what's known as resupination. Because we start with supination, we go into pronation, and we need to come out of that to be able to propel ourselves as we go forward. So that's where that stability comes in, that stiffness. All right. And if you lose that in the foot, then the joints above is going to have to do the work for what the foot is. If someone doesn't have that stability in their foot, you might see someone who walks what we say they walk with their hips, where they have to pick their leg up to go forward, as opposed to the natural tendency to propel themselves forward. You with me now?
Fascinating. That's fascinating to think that just a little foot down there can have an impact so high up. Yeah. And how we must be compensating so much then for there's little sometimes imbalances and weaknesses.
Yeah, and that's the thing about the joint by joint. Okay, remember, I'll say it again, it is a thought process. Okay, so what you find is if the foot is not doing its job, you might get stiffness in the ankle, for example. All right, again, you might be familiar with, like, for example, during lockdown now, what's been amazing that you see so many people out running. Okay, and the typical stretch you see people doing, or stretches, there's three main stretches to them doing for the lower body, right? Okay, they'll do that typical quad stretch where they're standing up, maybe holding against a wall, and they're pulling the knee up behind them, stretching the quads. They might have that straight leg where they're stretching their hamstrings, or they're up against the wall, one foot forward, one foot back, and they're stretching the calves, right? Okay. The reason they're stretching their calves is to get that mobility in that ankle. You with me? See that? Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So the joint by joint is telling you what goes on in the joints. So if you don't have that mobility in the ankle, you might have a tendency for the knee to get sloppy now, okay, to move more. And then the hips itself, I'm sure you've heard of people saying, I need to open up my hips. My hips are stiff. Okay, go on YouTube, put in hip opener or hip mobility, and you'll be bombarded with loads and loads of videos of mobility work on the hips, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's it's like you
right.
wouldn't know what to choose from.
Right. Okay, so we're coming back to now, like, sloppiness. I've explained sloppiness to you, what that really means, and get stiffness. Now, here is something for you to think about. So we said that the hips become stiff, but the low back now becomes sloppy, and is designed inherently for stability. How then do you get it where someone says, oh gosh, my back is stiff?
Right.
Okay, because it's designed for stability. It should become sloppy, isn't it? Why do we get this? People complain about low back problems. You know what I mean? My back is really aching, it's stiff. and we have low back pain. Okay. Now this is where the joint by joint thinking, hang on, that doesn't make sense. So if the hip becomes stiff and it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, the low back will take over. Okay, because the brain will say, you know what, Mr. Low Back, your mate down below, Mr. Hips, he's got all this great movements. You know, he can move in lots of different directions compared to what you can do. All right. But because he's not doing his job, I want you to take on a bit more. All right. But when the low back starts taking on a bit more, the brain will like say, hang on, mate, you're doing too much now. Okay. And what he'll do is he'll make the low back stiff.
So it's a protection mechanism then. Oh, right. Interesting.
Right. Okay. All right. But what you'll see from what I've just said, understand from what I've just said, is that the low back becomes sloppy first, and then it's a protection mechanism, like you said, for become stiff.
So it would suggest that by that time, it's actually, you've already gone quite far into misusing your body, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of already the second stage after.
Yeah. And then, this is interesting also because the low back now, he's got, below him, he's got Mr. Hips, who's really lots of mobility is designed for. And then above him, he's got Mr. Thoracic Spine, who again has a lot more mobility. Now, there is a lot of movement throughout the spine. Okay, we're not saying that there isn't. Okay, but certain parts of the spine is going to move more than others. The lower back is quite good with flexion and extension. It can rotate, but you get a lot more of that going on in the upper back, in the thoracic spine. Okay, the neck is the most mobile part of the spine. All right. So you've got the low back who sat in the middle, and you've got the thoracic above him, who is quite mobile, and you've got the hips below him, who's quite mobile. Do you ever hear of people having stiff backs, for example, having to open up their back, open up their chest? You know, do we get more into this position where we can become more stuck in this position here?
Yeah, yes,
All
definitely, right. Especially when we're sitting down so much and slouching and.
Yeah. And what's important also is that the problem is not the sitting down, by the way. The problem is we're not doing anything to, we could say, override that. All right. So how do you go about sorting this out?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, actually, because now we've kind of moved from screening. Okay, we know there's problems.
Yeah.
We try and understand where it's coming from. Now the last stage would be, how do you repair it, basically?
Right. Okay. So again, you can use the joint by joint thought process, and you look at, if you have an issue, say for example you have low back pain. Okay, there is a theory around that's been around for quite a while now that the problem is not really in the back, the problem is with the hips. If the hips is not mobile, then as we said, the back will take on a job. So what you need to do is get the hips to do more mobility work. Hence, you go on YouTube, you'll find lots of exercises and videos on how to open up your hips, how to make your hips more mobile. Okay, if you go right back down to the foot, you could say that is a place to start, where you would make sure that the foot is doing what it's designed to do, because the foot itself is an amazing complex. You've got I think it's 26 bones in the foot, 33 joints, over 100 muscles and ligaments and all that kind of stuff, just in that whole foot complex itself.
That's quite amazing thinking about it, but it's true, because it is carrying the whole of our body, isn't it? And we often say we're not really taking great care of our feet. I have a friend who's a podiatrist, and she says it's just amazing how little people think about their feet, but how much work their feet do every single day for hours and hours on end.
Yeah, and you know, that's why we've got all this barefoot walking stuff as well, which is quite like big. You got certain shoes of, is it Vibrams? Oh gosh, I'll probably get slaughtered for not remembering that name. I haven't got a pair myself, that's probably why. you know. But you get the special footwear, which is designed for you to be more like barefoot, to give you to replicate the fact that you're not, to be like more like not wearing shoes, for example.
But you know, interestingly enough, just a little parenthesis, because we'll talk a bit more probably at some point just on slow jogging, but looking into this, into slow jogging, and there's actually there's people who just buy this very cheap, what they call the water shoes or something you wear on boats, and they're very soft, very flexible. Because obviously, if you run barefoot outdoors, in our, you know, places in the city, whatever, it's actually quite dangerous. You can have like bits of glass or whatever, you know, you can actually injure yourself quite badly. But instead of like spending so much money on very expensive, specially designed shoes, they just buy these shoes, plastic shoes you can buy, you know, in this, you know, and they run with those because they're quite wide. They're very soft, and they just protect basically the sole of the feet, but you have just the whole movement you should have in your foot.
Yeah.
So, and I've started running just with, I don't even use my trainers. I just use the flattest, lightest pair of shoe of trainer or that I have. Some people even jog in Crocs, just to give that freedom to the foot.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, you can even go further and say that you shouldn't wear nothing at all on your feet, because at the bottom of our feet we have so many proprioceptors, which is sensors that sends information up to our brain to tell us what's going on. I think the foot might have the most.
Well, I remember that when my children were born, the recommendation was when your child wants to start walking, do not put any shoes or even soft shoes, anything on their feet when they're indoors. Let the feet work out everything from that proprioception capability that they have.
Yeah. So you can also see that by working on the feet, if things are not happening down below there, then the rest of the chain, the joints above, is going to have issues. So if when we come back to the joint by joint now, if you have any issues, it's like, where do you start? Well, you can start anywhere, really. You can start with the feet. That could be your entry point where you start. You can also, if you've got low back pain, you could start at the feet, or you could start with the joints above and below, because the whole point of the joint by joint, or one good point about it is that it's about not looking at the joint that is having the problem per se. It's about looking at the joints above and below. But it's really looking at it from a systemic approach, you know, a whole body approach. Okay, so ultimately, you want to look and make sure that the joints above and below the one that has the issue, are they doing their job? And if they're not doing their job, you can go about with interventions to help them to do that job. Okay.
So for instance, if you had someone like, sorry, I'm interrupting, but if you had someone who would complain about like a knee pain or whatever, or maybe some, and maybe as well some tension in the upper back, you could potentially say, well, because the hip is, that's my thinking, because the hip is like right in the middle, it's most likely has to do with limited mobility with your hips, because you've got problems underneath and you've got problems above where that should be more stability, and maybe those two joints that should be more stable are compensating for something. If you started with the hips, that potentially could help.
Yeah. Well, there is a saying also, it's like the knee, you mentioned the knee, there is, people do complain about having problems with their knee, right? And there is a saying from another physiotherapist from America called Gary Gray. And he's known as the father of function, and he's got a famous saying where he says the knee is stuck in the middle with nowhere to hide. So it has its great brother above him, which is the hips, which is like, and with the powerful muscles around it, like the glutes and that, which is designed for mobility, and he's got the ankle. And if those two are not doing their job, the knee is stuck in the middle, it's got nowhere to hide. So it's gonna have to take on the brunt of those things. So again, to fix that, look at the joint above and below. And to go about fixing. So another question might come, you might be thinking is, because you're hearing about mobility, stability, which one do you go after first? Which one would you get?
That's
Right,
the $1 million question, isn't it? Is it a
right,
case of chicken and egg, or I'm sure you have an answer?
right. Well, I don't have an answer. They have an answer. I'm just really following what these experts, your Gray Cook and people like Gary Grays. I'm just following these experts and what they say. But we can also look at how we develop. You mentioned your children not putting shoes on them when they're starting to walk, and when we look at babies and how they develop. And they come into this world and they have all the mobility they need in the world. They're just full of mobility. They're super bendy, flexible, all the rest of it, okay? We could argue that their bones hasn't properly formed to the way it is as when we become adults and harden up and all the rest of it. But they've got lots of mobility, lots to spare, okay? What they then start doing is learning how to control that mobility, which is now we're talking about stability, okay? So there is looking at that, you can say, well, let's get mobility first. I mean, to be honest with you, in the functional movement screen algorithm, mobility always trumps stability. So you will always go after mobility first before stability, okay? And one way you could do that as well is to remember that, you don't have to just get all the mobility and then go after stability. You can get a little bit of mobility and then to save, what we say, like hitting that save button, like when you're on a computer, you hit that save button when you're doing some work, you save it by doing some stability work. So you get a bit of mobility, save it with some stability, and keep going in this yin-yang type thing here now. Okay.
That's really interesting, because that's also the approach in Pilates, where we try and get a little bit of every type of exercise in a session, where there would be not necessarily alternate mobility, stability work, etc. But there is we always make sure we have some exercises for mobility and some exercises for stability and strength.
Right. So now you brought back another question in my head, something that it's always been, people talk about, they say you go to Pilates and you go for mobility. And as you know, that I'm also a Pilates instructor. I've done the qualification, right? Okay. But I've always looked at it like, if you want flexibility, you want mobility, you tend to think about yoga.
Yeah, it's true.
Right?
Yoga is always associated with that.
Yeah, but if you want core stability, someone has a bad back, they say, oh, your core is not good. You need to strengthen your core. You need some stability there. You need to go to Pilates. Okay. So let's look at Pilates now, for example, using the joint by joint approach. Okay, this will be interesting now. Let's take the first exercise in the Pilates repertoire. Just for our listeners who might not be aware, can you tell us a bit about Pilates and about the Pilates mat series?
Well, basically, it's got, as I said, it's got like one of the exercises. There's 34 exercises, which originally Joseph Pilates, who's been about now nearly 100 years ago, that he set up his technique, was designed to basically strengthen and get the whole body strong, mobile, moving as it should be. But I don't know, what else did you want to particularly say?
An interesting fact is that Joseph Pilates and what he taught, what he practiced, the name he gave it, interestingly, is
Contrology.
Contrology.
Yeah, it's not called Pilates originally. Obviously, he was very humble.
He didn't call it after himself. The name Pilates only came after his death, wasn't it? But
when it was developed.
He called it Contrology. And what was he saying about stability? Being able to control movement. Yeah. All right. So if we take the first exercise in the traditional mat series, which is what you do when you go to Pilates class, we're not talking about the apparatus, because we know there is apparatus and you use apparatuses, but we're talking about just going to a traditional mat Pilates class. And there's 34 exercises, like you said, and the first one is called 100.
That's right.
And the 100 is an exercise that where you lift half your body weight off the floor from a position of central body control.
Yeah.
Okay. So you lift your legs and you lift your upper body, but you're controlling it from that core region. Okay. And what's interesting is that because you have that control in that central region, you're able to move your legs and your upper back. Remember I said about the door and about the hinge controlling the joint? But let me give you another analogy, one that to me, I think of it is about the catapult. Okay, en français, catapult?
Yes.
Okay, so
we found another word for it, wasn't it? There was another word for it.
Yeah, some people call it the slingshot, right?
Slingshot, that's it, yeah.
The slingshot, okay? Now, I'm more comfortable with the word catapult, okay? And we all know what a catapult is. You can think of it as like a Y shape, and it's got a rubber band, and you put like a pellet or stone or something in it, and you would pull it back, and then you would let go, and it would just fling or sling, as like slingshot, it will sling it away, right? Okay. So the catapult is really interesting because within that design, you've got stability and mobility.
Yeah.
The rubber band that you're pulling back, we would say that is the mobility aspect of it. Whereas, let's just say the Y shape of the catapult itself, where you hold it in your hands, that would represent the stability factor. If you just hold that catapult very loosely in your hands and you was to pull the rubber band back, you won't be able to pull it back so far because you get to a point where the catapult itself will start following the rubber band.
Right, yes, I see, yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to express more of that mobility in the rubber band, you have to make sure that you hold that catapult tighter. Do you with me?
Absolutely, yeah, totally makes sense.
So you can fire that. So there you have stability, which allows you to get mobility. All right. So back to the Pilates now. This is what I think, okay, now I can see why people might say that Pilates, you can go to Pilates and you can have a lot more mobility. And I hope I don't get bombarded by Pilates instructors, and there's a lot of people who is more expert on this than me. But it seems to me that by having more contrology, as Joseph Pilates says, more stability, you're able to express that mobility. Okay? Just as babies, we know, are very mobile, without the stability, they cannot express it. They're lying around on their backs and rolling around onto their floor, isn't it? And the fact that when they start to roll around, that's them starting to build that stability. They need to have the stability to be able to get up onto, first they get up onto their knees and then start holding onto things and eventually stand up to be able to express that mobility.
Do you know the image I have about my babies? But I'm sure even if you don't have babies, you can maybe see like other babies around you, your friends' babies or nieces and nephews. When they're just born and like in the first few months, when they're, as you said, when they really can't move by themselves, but what do? They go on their back and they stretch their arms really tight and they pull their legs off. And so basically they're in that position of that exercise, the 100, but also the beginning of a lot of strengthening exercises for the core, where you lift just your arms and your leg off the floor, and they're just like so contracted, and you can see everything comes from that central region, which there's like people sometimes have the wrong idea about certain type of exercise regime, and for instance Pilates. I always say, if you to my clients, when you contract this, it's called a powerhouse, isn't it? The central region, all of this, the pelvic floor, all of this contracted. If you then move your arm out and back in, it floats, because you just region to have this core stability, but it just makes your limbs so much lighter. And I tell them, I said, imagine this happening if you have a good core and you just contract it a little bit when you walk up the stairs. or you get in and out of your car, imagine how much lighter your leg is to move, how much easier it is for your body to move, just to do those simple movements. You carry your laundry basket, you carry your toolbox, you carry your kids, anything. All of a sudden, you are giving like this super injection of power for things to move, and therefore you don't have to use compensation to do those movements. So that's when we do a session completely just on Pilates, we can go a lot more into details into this thing, but just to give a little bit of a teaser.
Because Joseph Pilates, he was really amazing guy, and you could say he was ahead of his time, you know, and you know, and they say that he's built all that from the way we move naturally. Like you said, that was a great example of how the babies moving, you know, and obviously being a mother, you would notice that more than maybe I would have been noticing things. But you could see the similarities and stuff like that. And it's brilliant, you know, and that's why, for example, the 100 exercise, which, like I said, we'll talk about it, but that's seen as the gateway into your Pilates practice.
Yes, definitely.
What about, so I'll give you one more example then about
go ahead.
Joint by joint. Okay, if we think about squatting, okay, so everyone talks about squatting. All right, to be able to do, say, for example, a deep squat, if you don't have that mobility in your joints, in your ankle, then you can't bring your knees past your toes, so to speak. You're gonna have to make up for it in other areas. If you don't have the mobility in your hips, you can get this thing that they call where you round your back. I can't. There's a word for it, but where you round your back and you go down, because you know which could then be quite dangerous, especially if you've got a weight on your back. Okay, you don't want to be able to round your back. You want to be able to keep it, get that core engaged, to keep the spine, to hold that weight so that you can do a squat. So you need the hips to have the mobility so that you can do that movement. So again, you can see how the joint by joint approach plays out. And if you're looking at someone with a squat and you can see the issues in there, you know, you then want to correct it.
And this
Having said that, go on.
No, I just want to kind of bring it back as well. I like in our conversation to bring like sort of my sort of female point of view, which is you don't need to be like, what you were saying is so important, but maybe people think, oh, it's only relevant to people who carry, you know, who do the big weights in the gym. But no, it's actually relevant to anybody. If you want to pick up something from the floor, you really should be squatting. And this is I'm taking this from my friend who's a yoga teacher, Zahra, and she said, if you really want to strengthen your pelvic floor, especially, which is really important for us men and women, but women especially, is when you pick up something, don't bend forward, squat. So even, you know, if you don't have the mobility in your head to squat, to just pick up a simple thing on the floor, you know, imagine the problem that
that's sorry, right, you know.
You were just
the thing I was going to say was that I talked about the squat and the problems you might have in the squat. The FMS takes care of that, because even though it will screen the squat and see how you're doing, and it screens all these other movements, there is an algorithm where you would start a certain issue first. So you wouldn't go straight to the squat to fix that. You would look at certain areas first and fix those areas. Look at, you know, like mobility in the hips, looking at stability maybe in your spine, mobility in the shoulder, and you get all those things corrected first in your ankle before you then get to the squat issue.
So basically, we were saying about people who have all these issues, they've done a screen, or they've done an assessment, they know there's a problem, then what should they do? They should go then try and find someone who's FMS trained, like a PT who can do that, or just knowing that they have an issue, somewhere they can basically choose their particular type of exercise that they know will help with mobility.
I would say all of that, because the FMS, the joint by joint approach, it is just an entry point when we look at this thing that we call movement. And movement itself is multidimensional. There's all different aspects of that. Okay.
And I find that most now PTs, and although there might not be, just I find they're quite hard to find PT that are FMS trained here in the UK. There exist,
Yeah.
I found someone in the north, sounds really a great guy. But it's just, as we said, obviously we know Pilates, we know, certain, like you do kettlebells, and I know we have ways of kind of helping people to
yeah. I mean, what I would say is, if you have any serious issues, you should always go and get yourself assessed, especially if you have pain. Go and see the specialist, get yourself assessed. The FMS is something that is easily done. You get a lot of personal trainers use it in gyms and stuff, and also therapists themselves in clinical and also people in sporting environments. It's quite easy to do. It takes 10-15 minutes to do a screen to see how you're doing. But there's lots of other modalities, should we say, that can also screen your movement or assess your movements. It's just an entry point, an approach for someone who is not doing all of that but want to get on training, and they're thinking, how should I train? If I want to go out, say, doing running or something, what's something I could look at? And so you could use the joint by joint approach, and you could think, well, you can look at certain things. You can see if my hips is tight and my low back is stiff. You might think, well, maybe my low back is stiff because of my hips. You could think that. I'm not saying that is the reason, because there could be plenty of different reasons. It is a complex thing, but it's just something that we can put out there and just introduce to people.
I know I'm going to do a little plug-in for you. I know you're working on a project, and hopefully you'll be able to tell us more about it, where you will be doing some of this work online. And I'm sure a lot of people who are watching us would be quite keen to see what you can offer, because nowadays this is what a lot of people are into, trying to preempt injuries, trying to preempt problems. There's a couch to 5K now that's become extremely popular. I hope a lot of people are going to realize that they're going to stop before, if they start getting pain in the knee, pain in the ankle, pain in the back, that they stop before it becomes too bad. Go and see a specialist, go and see someone like you, and get the problem sorted. But there's one image, just to conclude really on this really fascinating discussion. What we've all learned a lot. There's one kind of an image of quite, I suppose it's quite famous image of you can't shoot a cannon from a canoe. If your canoe is like really wobbly on the water and everything, you're not going to really be able to aim your cannon very effectively. It's better on a stable surface than it has all the movement to do what it's supposed to do.
That's where we'll leave it for today. Thank you all for joining us. Please like and subscribe. Wishing you all good health and happiness. Take care.